And I just want to come on here today and talk about scripture that we've been breaking down. We've been doing an analysis of Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Last time we left off, we dealt with verse 24, where we actually get into the breakdown of some of the things that the Father is telling the Son. Hey, these are some things that are going to pretty much go, doesn't say the word character exactly, but that's what it means by guarding your heart. And these are some of these very specific instructions that he's actually giving to build the Son's character and give him advice. Well, today we're on verse 25. And with that as our context, I want to break down the scripture. I want to talk about what it means. I also want to talk about some of the strategies that are used, the literary devices that are used to break down and give us clarity about what the scripture means. I also have a video. I'm only able to pull in the audio right now. And it's a guy specifically talking about the main topic of this particular scripture. And he's breaking down his version of it. And I think it's really good. How he's breaking it down, I think it's good. There's some things that I disagree with, but I also think it'll be good because it's that part of it's more of opinion. I think it'll be good for you guys to hear it, draw your own conclusion. I'll also give you my perspective and tell you about some of the things that I think you got to kind of be concerned about what he's saying. But overall, a lot of it's pretty good. So we'll do that as well. All right, so without further ado, let's do our detailed analysis of Proverbs chapter 4, verse 25. All right, it says, "Let your eyes look straight ahead. Fix your gaze directly before you." So when we look in the scripture, we see a couple things, okay? We see a rhythm, right? We see the rhythm. The rhythm is let your eyes look straight ahead. Fix your gaze directly before you. So we see this pattern already formulating about eyes and how we're seeing things. Obviously, we're talking about he's telling the Son to have a certain level of focus, right? Let your eyes look straight ahead. That requires focus to look straight ahead. Understanding that there will be distractions that cause you to look to your left or cause you to look to your right. Fix your gaze directly before you. Again, we're still talking about a certain level of focus, implying that there's things that will come to cause and bring distraction. And that's what we want to focus on. We want to focus on those two points right there. Is one saying your eyes, one your gaze. We assume mostly that these are talking about the same things. But when we do a literary analysis of it using parallelism, we get to be able to see, we got to know the definition of this one, and then compare them. Well, the eyes is talking about physically looking. Your eyes straight ahead. And then your gaze directly before you is talking about being mentally focused. So we're talking about somebody, eyes looking straight ahead, being focused on what they're looking at. And using this in the terms of what God has given us, we're saying you got to be focused on what God showed you. Now that's going to apply. Now, there's one meaning of the scriptures when we break it down. There's many applications, right? So when we're talking about the applying side of the conversation, what we're essentially saying is there's going to be many distractions to come against you. We're saying physically looking, for a man has to be able to develop discipline with his eyes. A woman has to be able to develop discipline with her eyes. When God gives us a plan and says, hey, I want you to focus on this. This is your financial plan. This is what I want you to do. We have to be able to have discipline with our eyes. That's probably more better for our mental focus, right? Because we'll see many things around us. There'll be many opportunities to have many distractions around us. But we got to be focused. We can't let the distractions stop us, slow us down. Now, if we do some reversing now, right? How does this apply to, above all else, guard your heart? For everything you do flows from it. We're talking about some of those things that flow from it at this particular time. These things start off inside of our heart. These things are many things that are a part of our character. That's how they're connected. These things, these concepts are developed in our heart. Let's say, for example, when it comes to the eyes. As a man, me being disciplined with my eyes and not just staring at random women, that's something that starts in my heart, on what's written on the table of my heart, to say, hey, you cannot get distracted. Hey, you got to be focused. Same thing with the mentally focused on that same thing. As a married man of nearly 18 years, you got to be mentally focused on your marriage, on the things that God has given you, not on other things. Right? So that's what we're saying here, right? That is the understanding of the scripture. It's talking about being focused on what's before you and not being distracted. Sometimes our phones bring distraction. Sometimes drama brings distraction. Sometimes the news can bring distraction. No matter what takes place, we can't allow ourselves to be distracted from what God has for us and has shown us to focus on individually. We've all been shown something individually to focus on. And it's incredibly important for us to stay locked in on that. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and get a little bit more detailed analysis of on the application side, right? Because we just broke down the scripture. We know what the scripture means. We know how it applies to and is connected to guarding your heart. We know that these are literally the things that are being written on the table of our heart, right? But now I want to focus on the idea of focus. So the video I have for us to listen to today, it's a gentleman who's an entrepreneur. He's going to say some things that I absolutely agree with. And I'll stop and I'll give my opinion about that. He's going to say some things that I don't necessarily agree with. But I can see the dilemma. I can understand where he's coming from. And I look forward to breaking that down and separating the two as well. So let's get into this. Let's get into it.
ChatGPT, what's a
looks like they got an ad first. Hold on.
in 2025?
A future-proof business in 20.
A focused fool.
All right, check this out. First of all, his first line is a bar. Watch this. Listen to this. Here we go.
Can achieve more than a distracted genius. Do you?
This man said a focused fool can achieve more than a distracted genius. Man, he came out the gates with a bar. A focused fool can achieve more than a distracted genius. Woo! That was good. That's already a good start. That's already a good start because it shows you the value of focus. Doesn't matter what you know if you're not focused. Let's go ahead and keep going. I'll turn the volume up too so you guys can hear a little bit better. Let's get it.
More than a distracted genius. Do you know the difference between focus and discipline? Because me personally, I had no clue in the past. I thought that being disciplined was enough. It took me years to understand that, number one, I need focus, and then after that, I can be disciplined. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Erkka Suvanto.
So essentially what he's saying there is you have to have a target before you can be disciplined. Sorry guys, I'm trying to align this volume up. You have to have a target before you can be disciplined. You got to know what you're focused on. Because depending on what you got going on, it's going to be different. Your steps, your plan is going to be different depending on what you're focused on. As an entrepreneur versus somebody who's climbing the corporate ladder, we've got different goals. We've got different visions. We've got different ways to get there. Right? And one's not better than the other. They're just two different paths. So understanding that they're different paths, you got to already have a predetermined focus to say, hey, this is where I'm going. You can't be distracted by where somebody else is going. You got to be locked in and knowing where you're going. Let's keep going.
Many of you call me EJ. I'm the guy who's on social media, building a legacy and passing on all life and business lessons to each and every one of you. I have built 3 companies up to 5 million level, making all the possible mistakes out there and now talking about those lessons so that you don't need to go through the same headache. As I mentioned in my intro, being disciplined is simply not enough to get stuff done in life. I thought I was always effective because I was so disciplined, but I failed to realize that number one is focus, and then after that comes discipline. These are the topics I'm going to talk about today in this video. Let's dive in. I want to keep this video simple. It only has 3 parts. First, about my past, then about how I was able to find out what my problem areas were with lack of focus, and then last but not least, what I do now to get better.
And I want to say this too before we really get busy. And this is his journey. This is his mission. This is what he's gone through. So I don't want to be overly critical. That's not my point. It's to not be overly critical about his path, his journey, but to learn from his journey. You're going to see that he's accomplished some great things. And in order to get those things done, he had to learn some lessons along the way. And as he's trying to learn the new things he's learning today, he's making these adjustments. So that's the whole purpose. It's for us to learn about focus, right? For somebody who primarily talks about focus. This is one of the main things he likes to talk about. So I thought it'd be really good to review that. Let's get it.
But before we go there, I just want to answer one question. Some of you might wonder, why the heck am I talking about focus so much? Because so many of my posts, my social media content is directly or indirectly related to that. To me, it's simply because we need to be reminded more than we need to be taught. I want to hold myself accountable. Standing here in front.
I think that's a good line there. That we need to be reminded more than we need to taught. A lot of what we need is to keep doing the simple things over and over and over again. It's not new stuff. It's how to do the simple things better. So I like that. And it kind of ties into the idea of focus. So I like that. Let's keep going.
In front of the camera is one way for me to remind myself that I need to keep saying no all the time. This is so difficult for me, believe it or not. I can talk about it now because I have gone through so many difficulties and I now have tools in my toolbox to get better at this. And I'm passionate about passing that on if it helps any of you out there. So that's my past. Not able to say no, saying yes to basically everything, not understanding that no is the first step to focus.
I think that is an incredibly good line right there. He said, and it's incredibly important to bring this up, right? This man said, saying no is the first step to being focused. Man, that is such a good line. Saying no is the first step to being focused. Now, let me explain what he means by that. What I believe he means by that. If you don't have a target, it's hard to focus. And often other people will approach you with their target, which by itself is going to throw you off of your focus. Again, we're breaking down what it means to be focused, coming from Proverbs chapter 4, verse 25. Saying no, the ability to be able to tell people no is so important. In all love and all respect, it's not about being stingy or being selfish, but it's about making sure that the thing that God has you focused on and targeted on is the priority. That's what it's about. So I don't disagree with that at all. I think that's a very good and strong thing. And I think once you've gotten to a place to where you're really good at saying no, you know when to say yes. So I think it's important to be able to be really good at saying no. You got to be able to be good at saying no. You got to be able to know when to draw your boundaries. And for somebody who is always going to lean towards a yes, you really got to learn how to say no. You really got to put the work in to learn when and how to say no. So I thought that was really good.
What's the link? The link is this. When I say no, I buy myself time. When I have time, I have clarity. Then I can focus on the things that matter to me the most. And I can get really, really good at those. That's the link that we all need to understand. In the past, I used to have 3 focus areas: my kids, my training, and my business.
Now, this is where we're going
And
to disagree.
here, under kids, basically my family, I didn't just spend time with my kids. I used to do a lot of family-related stuff, which all dads do. That's normal. I probably here should have hired help and delegated more of the stuff. I had a lot of stuff on my plate. Training. I've always had my routines. Anywhere between 4 to 6 times a week, I hit the gym hard and I eat certain way, and I want that discipline in my life. That's really important to me. And then number 3, business. I had several projects running simultaneously. On top of that, I wanted to educate myself. I subscribed to Harvard Business Review, Wall Street Journal, local papers, read.
So let me break down what he's talking about right now. Essentially what he's saying is, in the past, he had 3 focuses. He focused on 3 separate, different things. Now, a lot of people will ask you, well, how do you juggle so much? Now, let me just tell you a little bit about myself. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm an investor. I'm a former merchant marine, which I have. I started off as a steward utility, which is basically like a janitor. By the time I left the industry, I left with a captain's license. I've been married for 18 years. I've done a lot, and I'm doing a lot. And from his point of view, what he's saying right now is, in the past, he used to do a lot. And he feels that it took away from what he was ultimately able to accomplish because he had multiple focuses. This is where we're going to disagree. Because there's a part of your life where you got to have a work-life balance. Now, you're gonna have people here. Here's where he's right. He's right that if he just put everything into his business, and let me see, the other thing he said was his training and his family life, and he just said, you know what, training, family life, I'm not gonna focus on any of those things. Would he have more time for his business? Absolutely. Would he accomplish more things? Absolutely. But he might lose the family and his health in the process. So we got to be very careful with our pursuit, with our chase of the things that we think that we want versus the things that God says, this is for you. And that means that you are going to have to split your time. And it's not necessarily about balance. It's more about prioritizing. And in different times and different seasons, you may have to prioritize different things. Obviously, my wife is always going to be first. Obviously, then the kids. Then God first. Then the wife. Then the kids. Then business. Then you get what I'm saying? That part is there's an obvious pecking order to this thing. But the amount of time that I put into it, there was one season where one of my businesses was just so much going on. It took my time away from the other one, and one was a passive stream versus the active stream. But the passive stream was the most important. It was the priority. So I had to focus on that in that season to make sure that was strong and solid and running. And then I had to come back and kind of rebuild up my active stream. So when you're talking about focus, unfortunately, we don't get to just ignore everything else. Because what will happen is you will lose the other things if you put nothing into them. So I don't really agree with his perspective on that, but I understand what he's saying. Just to have a difference in opinion.
Read books, watching shows, podcasts, anything, name it. I was there and felt guilty if I didn't do it. Why? Well, insecurities, weaknesses, did not know how to say no, and was uncomfortable letting certain fires just burn. Understanding what really matters, because I felt that I can really fix everything and I can influence everything in my life. And that was a big mistake. And now, in the second part, I want to explain to you what 2 things made me realize that I need to make a change.
Now, his reasoning is fair, though, right? He's saying he believed that him not being able to say no and do all these different things came from a place of what he's calling weakness, right? Which is essentially just not being able to say, this is my priority. And to that, I would say be careful of that, because again, some of what he's saying is really good, right? Being able to focus on a certain thing, prioritizing certain things in certain seasons more than you do others. It's just like there's a conversation around, because I think I mentioned I'm also a homeschooler, homeschool my kids. Um, there's a conversation sometimes people have around, now this is funny. A lot of times people ask, like, because my wife also homeschools, obviously. People ask her, how do you balance it all? Nobody ever asked me, how do I balance it all? Nobody else says, hey, as the father and the husband, how do you balance it all? Well, I'm about to give my take on that right now. And how you do it is you don't. It's not about balance. It's about prioritizing. And there's sometimes in some seasons, I have to prioritize this over this. Homeschool, I got to make sure my kids are being educated properly. So if that means I have to take a step back, or I have to find a systematic approach to how I'm going to approach my business this week, I'll make the adjustment. Because obviously they're the priority, right? Or in the investment side, if I have to hire somebody to do something because I don't have the time to do it, I'm going to make the adjustment. I'll make the adjustment. So it's not a juggle. You don't juggle. How do you do all of these things at once? You don't. You prioritize what needs your time, at what time of what day, and what space, and what hours you have the time to do those things for, according to the priority and what's needed.
Here in the second part, I want to answer that big question in my case, as far as what made me change. In order to understand this, I wanted to draw a line between 0 and 10. And this basically tells me that this timeline here, it's 10 years, and there's one big question in my mind. Coming back to number 2, what does excellence mean in my case?
Now, this part I think is good. Just don't focus on the number as a hard number. He's essentially going to say it takes 10 years to get good at something, or anything worth doing takes a decade, takes 10 years. Um, I wouldn't focus that out as a law or a literal. It's not a biblical principle or nothing crazy like that. But the thought and the concept, I think it's good, right? It takes time, and it's good because this is the level of focus you got to have on something if you want to do it. You've got to look at it long term. You can't just look at it and be like, oh, it's gonna take me 4 years to get that thing. So that's too long. I'm cool. It may not be worth doing then. You've got to look at things long term, long focus. What is the financial goal that God told you to accomplish? What is your marital goal that God told you to accomplish? What is your goal with your children that God told you to accomplish? It will drive you crazy if you have a temporary goal for your kids. Their maturity, what you're building. I'm teaching them about finances. I'm teaching them about investing. I'm teaching them about math. I'm teaching them about algebra. I'm teaching them about polynomials. Whatever you're teaching them, you better have a long-term perspective. Not 10 years, obviously, but you better have a long-term perspective for your own sanity and your own peace. My financial goals, I have a long-term perspective. I have checkpoints that I want to accomplish these goals. I have things that I'm going to work through, and eventually I'm going to get to where I want to get to. It's going to take time. So I like his concept of it takes a decade to accomplish anything worth doing. It's not a biblical principle though. It's not literal. But the idea that it's going to take you time to, and that's the level of focus that I have to develop, something that I'm going to be focused on something long term, I think that's really good.
I was able to figure out, based on my experience, based on the people that I have talked to, based on the results I have seen out there, that everything great takes at least a decade to build. So then the next question in my mind is that if it takes me 10 years, how can I grab my future and pull it towards me as quickly as possible? How can I expedite that learning process? Because it all boils down to ignorance debt. The cost of not knowing what we don't know has the biggest price tag in our lives. And we all have to pay down our ignorance debt, one way or the other. And there are two ways, with time or with money. With time.
So he's talking about, when he's saying ignorance debt, he's basically talking about just not knowing. That's usually the biggest problem that we all face when we go through anything. It's just not knowing. So what he's saying, you can either focus on making up that gap of knowing something. Again, we're talking about focus on something. We're talking about you being focused on something. You can either make up the gap of your focus, excuse me, by putting time into something, or you can make up the gap with money by hiring somebody to teach you the thing, walk you through the thing, by hiring somebody to do the thing. So again, as an investor, there's certain jobs, instead of me doing myself that'll take me 2 weeks to do, I'm going to hire somebody to do. I can make up that gap by doing that. Or if I don't have the money, or the time is better for me to approach it myself. Again, this is focus. But we have to make up those gaps. And that's how you got to look at things. How do I make up this gap? Is it better for me to make it up by putting time in and effort for me to learn it myself? You may have to do a little bit of both.
Time you go through the experience by yourself, you make mistakes, you get lessons, and then you adjust as you go. With money, you hire people who can coach you, who have been here at 10 plus years, so you can live multiple lifetimes of lessons without the scars if you talk to the right.
I love how he focused on the 10 plus years. Essentially what he's saying, again, remember I told you before, it's not necessarily about a hard lock number, but what it's about is saying you have experience. I'm not going to ask somebody for help that doesn't have the experience to truly help me through a process. I'm not going to partner with somebody who truly can't help me through a process. This is part of being focused. Because if I can't make up the gap and I'm going to hire you to do it, I need you to be able to make up the gap. It's incredibly important for me to have that as an option. And if I can't do it, I'm going to hire you to do it. But I'm not hiring you if you're just starting. Depending on what's going on. I may hire a painter that's just starting. That's not that big of a deal. I may hire a landscaper that's just starting. No, I probably want a couple years experience for that. But if I have you a contractor, somebody that's doing carpentry work, oh no, fam, you can't just be starting. No. You can't just be doing this for a couple years. No. Because you can do. My point is, there's certain levels of damage that somebody can do due to their lack of experience. This is part of focus. It's saying I can't do it, so I'm going to have you do it, but I need to have somebody make up the gap. So I need to make sure the appropriate person that I'm picking can do the thing. And the thing is, you may not be the appropriate person for that job. I can do certain jobs. I can paint. I've been painting. I used to paint when I was on a ship. So if it's dealing with an investment situation, I can paint. It's not a problem. But again, certain jobs, I need to hire out. I'm not hopping on nobody's roof. I will hire a contractor to do that.
Right people. So these are the really big questions here. So the ignorance debt, we all have to pay it down with time or money. The big question is, how can I grab my future and pull it towards me? And then it takes 10 years to get really good at it. How is my brother related to all of this? He's very good at focusing on the things that matter by saying no to everything else, and I being the opposite. By watching him succeed very well, being able to make money, gain the financial freedom, grow his company, and do all kinds of great things, which I was part of too. I was able to watch somebody who was super good at that. And then understanding that excellence takes that minimum of 10 years. So then focus comes into play when we understand that we need to really, really get good at something. And there's no way to get good at something if we have 100 things on our plate. If you remember the previous page or slide where I had 3 different focus areas, one might argue that we only have capacity, let's say 10 out of 10. That's not even a question, it's a fact. If you divide that 10 out of 10 into between 3 different buckets, so you basically get on average, let's say 3 out of 10. So how can you get really good at in any of these 3 if you only have that 10 out of 10 capacity to allocate?
And this is where I'm going to say this is where we definitely disagree. We definitely disagree on this point right here. Because as a father, you don't get to take time off from being a husband. As an entrepreneur, you don't get to take time off from being a father. Now, again, I also said, and I'll say it again. You also, the idea of I just balance it all out. it's not quite how it works. A better way of saying is you learn to prioritize what's important in the moment. You have 24 hours in a day. So I may have to prioritize work when it's time to work. I may have to prioritize family when it's time for family. I got to prioritize. That's the version of balance that most people are thinking of when they say, how do you balance it all out? Realistically, it's more about prioritizing what you can prioritize when you can prioritize it.
You can't. What I should have done is that I should have understood that maybe putting all of my effort, 10 out of 10, into one area for a couple of years and putting 2 of those 3 on a back burner and being comfortable with the idea that, okay, I won't be able to make any progress on those 2. But while I'm working on this one, making serious progress, then I can reprioritize and get back to these other 2 while it's their turn. That's the thing I should have understood. So these are the things that made me understand what excellence truly means and how focus is related to it. Hope this was helpful. In the last part, I want to talk about the new principles that I have applied. And these 4 are something that you can copy directly if they are applicable in your life as well. Make your own decision. Number 1, I'm going to go straight to it. Number 1, say no by default.
We spoke about this earlier, and I really want to bring that point back home. You gotta learn how to say no. I know for most of us as Christians, it's hard, and we tend to think that saying no is a bad thing. It's not. Not when you're focused. You have to know how to say no when you're focused on what you're focused on, and everything will surround that focus. Meaning, this is what God showed me to do. This is what God told me to do. And everything is going to be revolving around what God showed me to do, what God told me to do. I'm going to stay loyal to God through obeying Him and doing what He showed me to do. So because of that, there's a whole lot of saying no that's going to have to happen. And to be frank, you saying no is going to test a lot of relationships. It's going to really show you where a lot of these relationships truly are and where they're not. You're going to think some of these relationships are fantastic. They're good. But because you're really focused on what God showed you to do and you say no, there's a whole lot of people that's going to get upset. And that is okay. It is okay. You've got to learn how to be comfortable with that process. Now, he's saying say no by default, meaning my immediate answer is no. And that's going to give me some time to really process this situation. And I understand what he's saying. Not to say that I agree 100% or disagree 100%. I just want to explain what I believe he's saying. What he's saying is when I'm approached with something, my first answer is going to say no so that I can buy me some time. Because again, my main priority, my main focus is the thing that God showed me to do. So I'm just going to buy me some time. And then when I process it and I seek the Lord about it, if He shows me, hey, I want you to go ahead and do X, Y, and Z, then you can make the adjustment and say, hey, I thought about it, and this is what I can do. This is how I can help. This is what I want to do in this particular situation. Some people are going to be able to think really fast on their feet. Some people are going to already have a default no. Some people are going to say no, and then when the other person acts out, it's going to rather solidify that no. They're going to help you say no. But you've got to be comfortable with saying no. And I think having a default no until you are comfortable and you've been able to go back and pray about it and get on the same page with the Lord, I don't see anything wrong with that.
I'm going to ask myself, is this new thing that just got presented to me going to help me achieve my tomorrow's goals? If the answer is no, I'm going to say no. Way harder than it sounds. Trust me. I'm living it right now, every day, every moment. I have to remind myself. And like I said in my intro, this is one of the reasons why I talk to you guys about it, because I'm still a student myself. But these tools really work, trust me. If it doesn't help me tomorrow, I'm going to say no. Simple as that. Number 2, the 10-year rule, which I already introduced. It takes a decade to be really good at something. Understanding that, what, who, and where.
Again, he talked about being able to focus on something for a long term, 10 years. Be able to focus on something until it's completed. Being able to focus on something, understanding that you may have to use other tools. He said, what, who, where? What am I doing? Who can I help? Who can I use, or who can I hire, or who can help me to get to where I got to get there? And where? Right? Where am I going? These are all very important things when we're talking about being focused. You can't be disciplined if you're not focused. You got to have a target. You got to have something to aim at. We're
Starting
almost
with
done with
people
this.
who, one of the key questions in life overall, who do I spend my time with? If I'm dating somebody, I'm about to start a new relationship, a new potential business partner is being introduced to me, I'm going to ask myself, do I see myself spending time with this person or doing business with this person still in 10 years? If the answer is no, if my intuition tells me that I don't know, maybe it's always no, by the way, then I'm going to pass. I'm not going to start something that I can't commit the next 10 years to. This also sounds simple and it's very hard, but it's one of the strongest principles of the 4 in my case. So,
And I think that's good. And we'll review the very last item, and then we'll go ahead and shut it down. We'll review the last thing, and then we'll go ahead and shut it down.
10-year rule. What applies to different things? What is that I do? A new thing gets presented to me. It's the shiny object syndrome. And the better I get, the shinier the objects look. And the harder it gets for me to stick to my plan, staying course, and just keeping my head down. I keep saying no. Keep saying no. Understanding that if I'm really, really good at that thing that I just committed my next 10 years to, those ideas, those opportunities where it's basically for somewhere in life. New rule number 3, opportunity cost. Alex Hormozy, in one of his recent videos, American Thinker, somebody
I'm
who
gonna stop
do
it
that
right there.
for you.
Now, what he's talking about with opportunity cost is simply, while I'm doing this, I can't do that. Again, that concept is centered around focused. While I'm doing this, putting my time and effort into this thing, I cannot go do that thing. Okay? So it's important to know when we're focusing on something. These are little details, little nuggets that we can look at when talking about being focused. Wrap this thing up. Again, this scripture, Proverbs chapter 4, verse 25. It stems back from him saying in verse 21, do not let them out of your sight. Keep them within your heart. These are the things that he is inserting into the son's heart. He tells him to guard them things, to keep those things in his heart. He says there be life and health to him. He says above all else, guard them. And now he's giving him some of those items, some of those ideas, some of those concepts. That's what he's doing. That's what he's doing here. And he's essentially saying, you gotta be focused. And you cannot let things distract you. Again, let your eyes look straight ahead. Fix your gaze directly before you. Stay focused, stay focused, stay focused. This was our detailed analysis of Proverbs chapter 4, verse 25. I pray that this is encouraging and it blesses you, and this could be something that you can maybe review in your study time, maybe in the morning, maybe in the evening, whenever the Lord allows you to. Next time we'll go ahead and continue on with verse 26. Give careful thought to the path for your feet and be steadfast in all your ways. And we'll just keep breaking this thing all the way down until we get to 27, and then we'll go ahead and switch up the topic. But thank you guys so much for spending this evening with me in this detailed analysis of Proverbs chapter 4, verse 25. I believe earlier we did speak about the parallelism that we talked about. We also see a new concept called personification. Personification is when you take an item and you give it human characteristics in order to explain it and express it. And that's where we see in verse 25 verses, let your eyes look straight, telling the eyes to look straight, right? That can be looked at two different ways. Well, it's just your own eyes, but can obviously be looked at in the way of personification, because the eyes are being told to look straight, right? That's another concept that we'll see quite a bit in the book of Proverbs. Okay, so again, thank you guys so much for joining me this evening, and I look forward to getting into the next one with you. So God bless you guys. You guys have a good night.